What if I told you that one single sentence, just a few words, has thrown Zambia back into political chaos? Esther Lungu has spoken, and her words are echoing across the nation. She asked a shocking question: can Edgar Lungu's body be exported like frozen fish? For some, it was an angry outburst. For others, it was a coded message about the ongoing burial battle. But one thing is certain: this remark has reopened the deepest wounds in Zambia's politics. Why would the former First Lady compare her late husband's body to frozen fish? Was it frustration or a hidden message to President Hakainde Hichilema and his government? Stay with us, because in the next few minutes, we reveal the truth behind Esther Lungu's shocking words and why this remark may change the entire burial drama forever. Breaking news: Esther Lungu has shocked Zambia with a controversial statement asking whether Edgar Lungu's body can be exported like frozen fish. In this documentary-style report, we uncover why Esther Lungu made this explosive comment, the deep burial controversy shaking Zambia, how the Lungu family is handling pressure from government and courts, what this means for President Hakainde Hichilema, HH, and Zambia's political future. Stay with us till the end, because this frozen fish remark could change the narrative of Edgar Lungu's burial drama forever. The outburst that shook Zambia in the heart of a controversy already filled with secrecy and suspicion. One voice cut through the noise with thunderous clarity, that of Esther Lungu. The former First Lady, long regarded as reserved and cautious, stunned the nation when she exploded in anger. In an emotional statement, she lashed out at those suggesting her late husband's body could be treated like cargo, transported across borders as though it were nothing more than frozen fish. The words struck Zambia like lightning. To many, they were shocking, raw, undiplomatic, and brutally honest. But beneath the fury lay a deeper pain. Esther was not just speaking as the widow of a former president. She was speaking as a wife who felt her husband's dignity was under assault. For weeks, rumors had swirled. Was Edgar Lungu's body still in South Africa? Would it be repatriated to Zambia? And if so, under what conditions? The debates, played out in Parliament, on television, and across social media, often treated the body as an object in transit rather than a human life now at rest. Esther's outburst changed everything. Suddenly, the story was no longer just about logistics. It was about respect, memory, and the line between politics and humanity. Her words forced the nation to confront an uncomfortable question: when does political wrangling cross the line into desecration? But her eruption also revealed the immense pressure inside the Lungu household. Friends whispered of constant negotiations, of lawyers and advisors pulling in different directions, of a widow caught between grief and politics. For Esther, the comparison to frozen fish was not just a metaphor. It was a cry against the dehumanization of her husband's final journey. In markets and homes, reactions were fierce. Some applauded her courage, saying she had finally spoken truth to power. Others accused her of fueling division, turning private sorrow into public confrontation. And so, Esther's outburst became more than a soundbite. It was the spark that ignited a larger fire, one that would spread from family halls to the highest levels of government. Because in Zambia, the question was no longer simply where Edgar Lungu would be buried. It was whether the nation itself could navigate grief without losing its humanity. A family corner for weeks, the Lungu family has lived under a shadow. Behind the closed doors of their South African residence, a storm has raged, one not of their own making, but of politics, diplomacy, and suspicion. At the center of it all is a body that should have brought closure, but instead has become the most controversial symbol in Zambia's recent history: the remains of Edgar Chagwa Lungu. To outsiders, the debate is about repatriation, but to the family, it feels like a siege. Every phone call, every knock at the gate, carries with it new demands, new rumors, and new accusations. Esther Lungu, already battling grief, is now forced into the role of strategist and defender. She has to weigh every word, knowing that anything she says can ignite another wave of controversy. Her children, once shielded from the rawest edges of political life, now find themselves under the same relentless glare of public judgment. Lawyers whisper of bureaucratic hurdles. Officials from both Zambia and South Africa press for answers. Journalists circle like hawks, each hoping to capture the next sensational headline. But perhaps the most crushing weight is the silence of uncertainty, where how, and even if Edgar Lungu will be laid to rest in Zambia, remains unresolved. For the family, every delay feels like an insult. Every rumor feels like another stab in a wound that refuses to heal. And so, in private, arguments erupt. Should they resist the government's demands? Should they negotiate? Or should they walk away entirely, turning their back on a homeland that no longer feels like home? To many Zambians, the Lungu family seems privileged, protected by wealth and status. But inside their secluded walls, they appear cornered, isolated, mistrustful, and trapped between honoring a husband and father and navigating the ruthless machinery of politics. And yet, even as the family feels surrounded, one fact remains unshakable. The eyes of the nation, and indeed of Africa, are upon them. Because how the Lungu family handles this moment will not just define their private grief. It will shape their legacy for generations to come. The South African standoff, Johannesburg, Pretoria, Cape Town, cities that should have been backdrops to quiet mourning have instead become stages for one of the most unusual diplomatic dramas in recent African history. South Africa, a country no stranger to political tension, now finds itself drawn into Zambia's grief. What should have been a private family matter has spilled into the halls of government, the desks of lawyers, and even the chatter of ordinary South Africans. At the center lies one question: can Edgar Lungu's body legally leave South Africa? It may sound simple, but the answer is tangled in paperwork, court rulings, and political sensitivities. South African officials insist that regulations must be followed. Death certificates, repatriation permits, and cross-border approvals, each step a potential obstacle. Yet behind the bureaucratic language, there are whispers of something more. Some say South Africa is reluctant to release the body without guarantees from Zambia. Others suggest Pretoria fears being accused of siding with one political camp over another. For President Cyril Ramaphosa, the issue is delicate. To mishandle it risks sparking unnecessary friction with a neighbor. Meanwhile, activists and commentators within South Africa have begun to ask difficult questions. Why is a foreign leader's body still here? Why has his family chosen this soil over his homeland? And most controversially, what does this say about Zambia itself? For the Lungu family, the standoff is maddening. Each delay adds another layer of humiliation, another headline questioning their motives. For Zambia's government, it is an opportunity, or perhaps a trap. Do they press harder for the body's return, or do they let South Africa carry the burden of indecision? And so the standoff drags on. Not with soldiers or weapons, but with court documents, press conferences, and diplomatic communiques. Yet the stakes are no less real. Because in this strange tug-of-war, Edgar Lungu's legacy hangs in the balance. His final resting place, whether in the red soil of Zambia or the quiet cemeteries of South Africa, has become a political battlefield. And like all standoffs, one side will eventually have to yield. The question is, who? Esther's outburst for days. She had remained silent, a widow grieving in the shadows, surrounded by whispers, but offering none of her own. Then suddenly the silence broke. And when it did, Esther Lungu's voice carried across Zambia like a thunderclap. Her words were not measured. They were not polished. They were raw, emotional, and unflinching. She accused the government of humiliating her family. She questioned why her late husband's body was being treated, in her words, like frozen cargo, an object to be shipped and inspected, rather than a man who once led a nation. The outburst electrified the air. Supporters applauded her courage, calling it the voice of a woman who had lost everything and refused to be silenced. Critics, however, dismissed it as political theater, an attempt to stir public sympathy and distract from lingering questions about the family's wealth and exile. But whatever one's view, there was no denying the impact. In a matter of minutes, Esther Lungu had shifted the narrative. No longer was the story only about Edgar Lungu's contested remains. It was now about dignity, motherhood, widowhood, and the fragile line between politics and humanity. Inside Zambia, her words sparked fierce debate. Was she speaking truth to power, or was she manipulating grief for political ends? Was she the victim of an uncaring state, or the architect of her own family's isolation? For Esther herself, it hardly mattered. This was not strategy, it was survival. A cry of pain from a woman who felt cornered, abandoned, and disrespected. And yet, even in that raw moment, the consequences were clear. Every statement she made would echo through courtrooms, newspapers, and political rallies. Every phrase would either rally supporters or deepen suspicion. Esther Lungu's outburst was more than a widow's cry. It was a declaration that she would not go quietly, that she would not allow her husband's memory to be reduced to paperwork and permits. But in Zambia's heated political climate, such defiance is never without cost. And as the dust settled, one question lingered. Had she strengthened her family's position or placed them in even greater danger? The courtroom clash, when politics and grief collide, the battleground often shifts to one place, the courtroom. For the Lungu family, legal halls in both Zambia and South Africa have become as charged as political rallies. Here, judges, lawyers, and clerks now hold the power to decide what should have been a private family decision, where Edgar Lungu's body will rest. The arguments are fierce. On one side, the family insists on dignity, privacy, and autonomy. To them, the body of a former president should not be reduced to a bureaucratic dispute. They argue that their rights, and the late leader's wishes, are being trampled by a government more interested in appearances than compassion. On the other side stands a state. Zambia's officials argue that Edgar Lungu was not just a husband or father. He was a head of state, a man whose death and burial belongs to history, not just a family. To allow his remains to linger in foreign soil, they say, would dishonor the nation itself. Lawyers clash over permits, certificates, and jurisdiction. Can a court in South Africa override Zambia's demands? Does the family have the final say, or does the state? Each hearing becomes a spectacle, watched closely by reporters, dissected on radio talk shows, and debated in homes across Zambia. But beyond the legal arguments, something deeper is at stake. Each side fears defeat will not just mean losing the case, but losing the narrative. For the Lungu family, it would mean surrendering control over their patriarch's final chapter. For the government, it would mean appearing weak, unable to claim ownership of its own history. The courtroom becomes a stage. Lawyers thunder with passion. Judges raise eyebrows at carefully chosen words. And in the gallery, every sigh, every murmur is amplified by the cameras waiting outside. Yet beneath the formalities, one truth is unavoidable. No matter how dignified the proceedings, this is not simply about law. It is about power. And in this courtroom clash, the verdict will echo far beyond the chambers, shaping not only the burial of a former president, but the legacy of Zambia itself. Church versus state in Zambia, the church has always been more than a place of worship. It is a force, a moral compass, and often the last line of defense when politics becomes too bitter to bear. And now, as the fate of Edgar Lungu's body divides the nation, the church has stepped into the storm. Priests, bishops, and pastors speak with urgency from their pulpits. Their message is clear. A former head of state deserves dignity, and Zambia must not allow politics to desecrate death. In their sermons, they remind the nation that death levels all, rich or poor, powerful or powerless. Even presidents must meet their end with humility. But the state hears something different. To government officials, the church's words feel less like guidance and more like interference. Behind closed doors, some accuse religious leaders of siding with the Lungu family, of cloaking politics in the language of faith. The tension deepens when church leaders begin mediating directly, offering themselves as bridges between the family and the government. They argue for compromise, for respect, for compassion. Yet in doing so, they become political players themselves, willingly or not. For ordinary Zambians, the church's involvement cuts both ways. Some see it as a voice of conscience, a shield against state power. Others question why the clergy should decide matters that belong to courts and governments. And so, a delicate standoff emerges, the church on one side, the state on the other, with the Lungu family caught in between. Each side claims to defend dignity. Each side insists history will judge them rightly. But the deeper question remains, where does spiritual authority end and political authority begin? In a nation where faith is woven into daily life, that line is blurred, perhaps permanently. The church may not carry weapons or write laws, but in Zambia, its influence is undeniable. And in this moment of grief and power, it has become more than a moral voice. It has become a kingmaker in the struggle over memory, burial, and the meaning of leadership itself. A nation divided by a coffin should unite a nation in grief. But in Zambia, Edgar Lungu's coffin has done the opposite. Instead of silence and reflection, it has unleashed anger, suspicion, and political rivalry. In Lusaka's streets, voices clash. Supporters of the former president demand his immediate return and a state funeral befitting a man who once held the highest office. They see the delays as humiliation, proof that the current government is intent on erasing his legacy. But others argue differently. To them, Lungu's years in power left scars, allegations of corruption, abuse of power, and a divided nation. They ask, does he deserve the honor of a hero's burial, or should Zambia quietly turn the page? Everywhere, the coffin becomes a symbol. In markets, it is whispered about with anger or sorrow. On social media, it is meme, headline, and battleground. Even in Parliament, the coffin hangs like a shadow, shaping debates not just about one man's death, but about what kind of nation Zambia wants to be. The divide cuts deep. Families split in their opinions. Communities argue across dinner tables. Some see Edgar Lungu as a father of the nation, others as a cautionary tale. And with every passing day, the coffin remains unburied, the divisions unhealed. For President Hakainde Hichilema, the challenge is immense. To allow a grand burial risks reviving the power of his rival supporters. To deny it risks appearing vindictive, disrespectful of tradition. Either choice carries consequences that will echo into the next election and beyond. Meanwhile, the Lungu family watches as their grief is transformed into a national spectacle. For them, the coffin is not politics. It is husband, father, and grandfather, a man reduced to a symbol of division he never could have imagined. And so Zambia finds itself in a strange and painful moment. One nation, two memories, and a coffin that refuses to rest. Because sometimes the deepest divides are not caused by the living, but by the dead. The final journey, every story must end. But in Zambia, the end of Edgar Lungu's story has proven more complicated than anyone imagined. For weeks, his body lingered in uncertainty, caught between South African law, Zambian politics, and the cries of grieving family. Yet now, the moment everyone has waited for draws near, the final journey home. It begins quietly, a sealed coffin, draped in cloth, prepared for travel. For some, this is the long-awaited return of a former leader. For others, it is a bitter reminder of divisions that never healed. But whether in celebration or protest, crowds gather. Airports, roadsides, and churches swell with people determined to witness history. The journey itself is symbolic. Every mile from South Africa to Zambia carries more than a body. It carries questions about legacy, justice, and forgiveness. It carries memories of triumphs and failures. It carries the weight of a nation still deciding how to remember its past. When the coffin finally touches Zambian soil, emotions erupt. Some weep, some cheer. Some remain silent, unwilling to forget the pain of his presidency. But all know they are part of a moment that will be remembered for generations. The ceremonies that follow are equally divided. The family insists on dignity and respect. The state insists on protocol and order. The church demands prayer. The people demand answers. And in the middle of it all lies the coffin, silent but louder than any speech. For Esther Lungu, this journey is both an end and a beginning. The end of her husband's earthly path, and the beginning of a widowhood that will forever be tied to politics. For President Hakainde Hichilema, it is a test of leadership, whether he can guide the nation through grief without igniting more division. And for Zambia, it is a mirror. The final journey of Edgar Lungu forces the nation to look at itself, at its wounds, its memories, and its fragile unity. Because in the end, a burial is never just about the dead. It is about the living and what kind of future they choose to build after the coffin is lowered into the earth.